So I think we can start softly, and I just introduce the topic for today, and I hope that Linea will join us in very short time, and then I think we are all the people that I think will join us in the start of the meeting, and then Mattias and Jenny from SQ will join later during the meeting is the idea. So the topic of this today is the cost caused by lack of quarries, Kostnaden för täktbristen i Sverige. And of course this is just my stupid naming, but it basically has to do with if we want to have a functioning market where we sell and reuse and different kind of materials, we have to have nodes in the network that are fairly well suited, close to the demand and to the supply of the material, basically in a very primitive explanation. And we have great researchers in this field. Kristina Lundberg from Ecoloop here today. We have Fredriksson from Linköping University, and we have Misa from Helsinki, also a PhD, doing his PhD within this area as well. And you got some nuggets of their research in the notes, not of course all, and I did a very rough summary of their research, so blame me, not them, if you found something is weird. And the goal of today's meeting is of course very ambitious as always. We would like to know the cost for society for having too few nodes in the system. The background is that we have, during the last 30 years, decreased the number of sites that provide stones in Sweden. There are many different reasons, and Morten will shoot me down and say I'm stupid, but basically we have fewer now than we had before. There are many reasons, like we had gravel before that had smaller quarries, and we have done, of course, development when it comes to the quarry tools that makes scale important. You can't have as small as we had before, but we have an issue with the number of nodes, and it's very, very hard for us to get new nodes in the system. And I think more than any, I think Maria has it from the commercial point of view. I think Kristina has it from the kind of a research point of view. Then when we research this, nobody wants to have the quarries anywhere. They want them to be there, but never to be seen, so to say. So I think that is the issue of topics. And each of those people mentioned now, Anna, Misa, Linea, Kristina, and Jenny, and Mattias, will have a short introduction, and of course everybody else is free to join in, but I think that they have kind of prepared something short that they will start out with. So I was wondering if Kristina would like to start the conversation. Is that fine?
Yes, I can do that. I will try to share. Can you see something?
Yeah, that's great.
Good. So Carl asked me to talk about the lack of nodes in the aggregate market, and I totally agree with what he just said, that the number of quarries in node has decreased. No doubt about it. I think we all agree. But we could discuss and argue around why that is happening and what to do about it. As I see it, the cost for aggregates is very invisible, especially for those responsible for building, because the cost of handling and transporting the aggregates are kind of merged into other costs, and it's difficult to see what the costs really are. And society has not been aware of the situation and the cost because they're invisible. And they have been focusing on creating and planning for housing, and not really been aware that the cost is rising due to the handling of aggregates. I also believe that the markets have not been successful enough in separating quarrying from recycle nodes, and to provide modern nodes for aggregate. And I will explain a bit more what I mean. And why should they, and also say something about why I think it's important to separate quarrying from recycling nodes. Not always, you don't have to do that always, but in specific cases you need to do it. Before, in Sweden, we had a lot of settlement, a lot of nodes for handling soil and rock in the city center. This is a picture from Stockholm and the island I live on, Kungsholmen, where we had a settlement for asphalt. This picture is from year 2000, so it's not that far in history. We also had big nodes in Farsta and some other places quite close to the city center. These areas were often quite big, dusty and noisy. And I think that this type of nodes is that most people associate aggregates, places, sites for aggregates with. And these sites has been terminated and sold due to high land prices. You have you'd like to build housing instead of having nodes for aggregates here. And to be successful and to actually increase the amount of nodes in society, I think that we have to have this in mind, the history in mind, because I don't think no one wants to get back to this situation. We will not accept handling and transferring masses close to the city center as it looked like then. And of course, that is also why the aggregates are transferred long, and we upgrade them and we crush them far from the city center. But we need to get back to these nodes to shorten the transportation and increase recycling. So as I see it, we need to plan for the future, and to be able to have them close, they need to be mobile and temporary. And with that, I don't say that every nodes have to be mobile and temporary. We also need the more permanent that is situated far out from the city center. But we have to also have these smaller mobile temporary nodes close to construction sites. And in order to have them there, they need to be attractive and not disturb the people living around them. And therefore, we have to think in a new, innovative way of how to present these nodes. Maybe we need to add some social value for nearby residents. Why should I, as a resident, tolerate an area which doesn't give me any value at all? So we need to think of to add social value, both in attractiveness, but also in services. And I think there is also a good chance to add value for the environment, for like energy, charging, and so on. So we have to think a bit different in order to provide nodes close to the construction site. But another thing is the costs, of course. And as I introduced to say, the cost today is very invisible, and it's not possible to really show the cost for handling aggregates and how much you can save in costs in handling aggregates close to the construction sites. We have done some effort to do some calculations. we have used data from a housing project in Stockholm, where the handling and transporting and disposal of 200,000 tons of rock costed, according to our calculations, 36 million kroner. If it wouldn't only be rock but also soil in different kinds, the cost increase almost to a double. And if you then recycle these materials close to the construction site, according to our calculations in this case, you could save 12% of these costs. And if you have then not only rock, you could save a bit less, 6 to 7%. Then we also have another case where we did calculations for a company in an expansion area, where they would have like 1.5 million of excavated soils every year. And doing some calculations for handling these material close to the construction site instead of as they did today, where they transported the excess soils to different sites quite far away. The saving for recycling was about 150 kroner per ton, including the investment cost for the node that they needed to recycle this material on. So the key for being able to create more nodes in society today, I think, is to show the costs, and that is a bit tricky today. So we need to like separate cost and do this together, so we have more examples. And we also have to think in a more modern way in building nodes. We can't do as we did before. We have to be more innovative and think in new ways. Yes, that was my last.
You're muted, Carl.
Carl, you're muted.
Unmute. Thanks a lot, Kristina. That's great. We got some for me new numbers here. I didn't get knew those before. 6 and 7 and 12. That's very interesting. And we also welcome Linea to the conversation. Hello, Linea. How are you doing? I think I muted you. Sorry, I will unmute you here. Sorry. Can I can't unmute you. I can ask you to unmute. And we also got Jenny from SQ. Welcome. And we will continue with the Hey Jenny.
Hi.
Welcome. Nice to have you. And I was wondering if Anna could continue and do your introduction, and then my idea is that we wait with all the comments until the end, if that is okay. So we do those introductions now, and then we have open discussions about all those things. Is that fair? So
Okay.
Anna, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, and really nice to be here. My name is Anna Fredriksson. I'm an associate professor at the Linköping University. I'm leading a research group working with urban development and logistics. So my field of knowledge is logistics, so I go into this with a logistics perspective. I'm not that good at earth and rock masses. I'm good at moving and planning and controlling different material flows, and among those, one material flow is earth and rock masses. But if we start looking at construction transport in general, we have 90% of the construction transports are on road, and we know that about 20% of the transported weight in Sweden is construction related, and 50% of the urban goods transport weight-wise is construction related. And most, I would say majority of these percentage numbers are related to earth and rock masses. And earth and rock masses are generally, from a logistic perspective, rather short distance transports, even though they can become shorter, as Kristina said. If you look at the construction project and infrastructure project, about 60% of the CO2 emissions during the project time are transport related. So they are a rather substantial part of the emissions come from the transport of earth and rock masses, actually. So we have worked with this, I think, about 2 years now from a logistics perspective, and we looked a little bit about what is the process from a project perspective. We have the soil and rock or earth and rock mass generation, and then we need some handling, separation, storage, and processing at the source. Here we have one alternative of doing things. Either we can collect it and bring it further, or we can actually reuse it straight away. That means that we actually have almost no transport, but then we need space in order to be able to do it straight away. So if we decide on collecting it and transport it further, we have also another couple of options. It's either that we can go for disposal, or we can have reuse in another project. And if we're going to have reuse in another project, we also again need handling, separation, storage, and processing for reuse in that project. So there is a continuous flow of these materials from their generation to their end point. And the question is then, how much transports do we need to have in this process, I would say. And here we have, together with some colleagues in Vienna, worked a little bit with an optimization model, looking at the relationship between transport and storage areas. And in order to optimize this, today I would say in generally there's very little optimization of those transports. It's a lot of focus on what type of materials do we have in a project, but not that much focus on how can we optimize the transportation of these materials? How can we decrease the number of transports? Because a good thing when you do transport research is that if you decrease the number of transport, you usually decrease the cost and you also decrease the emissions. They come together. So by decreasing the number of transports, we can have a win-win situation. However, in order to decrease the transports, then we need storage areas in good locations. Otherwise, we need to transport them longer. So we need to, in a project, we need, of course, you have worked with this, know this very well, but we need to identify available quantities at different locations, and then also need to identify what can reuse at different locations. We have this balancing problem. And by that, knowing what to balance, where, and so on, we get the quantities to transport. We also get the quantities to store. That decides on the number of transports and, of course, the areas we need. And then we need to identify possible location areas, because there are, of course, a lot of limitations of what areas we can use and so on. And what transport modes are available connected to these areas is also an important question. And then we can start evaluating like what maximum storage capacity we need, maximum transport capacity needed, and then the environmental and cost impact of these different combination scenarios. And we also need to consider a geographical contract border and securing these storage areas. And then we can think of procuring contractors. This is how I would like to see this process work. And if we do this in an experiment and we play a little bit with different weight then on transport and storage area cost, we can see that we can make a lot of difference. So here you see the total cost for the different ways of combining it. You can see we can have very varying cost. We can have if we have a scenario where we put 80% of the focus on the transport cost and 20% on the storage cost, and we have a homogeneous fleet, we can actually have a very low cost. However, we will have a low total cost, but a very high storage cost. We will also have very low CO2 emissions, because then we optimize the system based on the transport impact. However, we can also do the opposite. We can optimize the system based on the storage area, storage areas, and then we in this case, get a little bit higher total cost, but also a lot higher CO2 emission. So what's important here is to see the relationship between the storage areas and the transports. And this will then, if we're gonna make a difference, if we're going to decrease the environmental impact and the cost of these type of transports, we need to move away from how we do today. This is a little bit a picture I borrowed from Ecoloop, where they show like the different, how we go all over the place in one sense in order to transport things, and we need to start transporting it in more of a straight flow, and then it becomes a very important questions on how to better utilize these nodes as part of the transport networks, and see those as a possibility then both for storage, but also for maybe electrification, exchange of working people, but also different type of services. So it becomes a very much a question of planning a whole system of different project sites, different nodes for this handling and storage of materials and the transports. And then we have, together with Ecoloop, continued working a little bit regarding these, what we call MLC, Mass Logistics Centers. And we can see that they have 3 roles in the systems. They can work as a systems coordinator. That means the planning and controlling of the transport and the storage area utilization. They can also work as knowledge hubs, where they can gather knowledge about different materials, but also knowledge about what to do with the materials, and transparency. And a society development source, where we can actually think of this balancing circularity and how we can implement new ways of transporting, for example, increasing the utilization of water transports, but also increase the utilization of, for example, electricity. And here we need to work between the location, like what services, so what type of services we can offer in form of coordination, planning, traceability, different types of transports, information sharing, and so on, is then dependent on what type of flows we are going to control and handle. So what type of flows do we have? What type of materials do we have? What volumes, what qualities? Is it long-term? Is it temporary? And as well, what type of ownership do we consider? Like, is it focused on just single projects? Is it a consortium of projects? Should it be public and private, or private? So all these things together are to be considered when we're designing these nodes. And of course, some of these nodes have, as Kristina said, they have to be long-term and have a lot of services added to them, which means they can do a lot with the materials. And some of them should be short-term. And then maybe I don't have that many services, but just focusing on the local market. And others are going to be focusing on having a very quick frequency of reuse. The materials go in quickly, go out quickly, then we can have a small area. Versus if we're going to have a longer time, we need a larger area because we're going to have more materials to store. So there's a very interesting inherent relationship, I would think, between the transports, the service offering, and the areas available and their location. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks a lot. That's great, Anna. Awesome. Great presentation. We will save the questions for after all presentations. And I would like to say, Linea, do you want to say something or give your input, your background, or your thoughts about this topic? And please present yourself as well, Linea.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Hi. I have lots of problems to unmute. I don't know. When
That's
you
fine.
come in from the telephone, it becomes a bit tricky. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to this session. I work at the VTI as a senior researcher, and I have looked at the construction industry and the waste flows for many years. Not only looking into aggregates, but all types of materials. I think the presentation so far has been really great. What we have done with aggregates actually connects rather well to what Anna just talked about with different transport modes, because we did a pilot test where we actually used aggregates from Ragn-Sells, which is a big recycling company in Sweden, and transport them through sea to the port in Trelleborg, which is in south of Sweden, to use it for their development, and we could see that this was really efficient from the environmental perspective, as you could use ships instead of a lot of trucks, and you have of course this challenge of, as Anna told you, about having the space, because when the need is there, you need to have the supply at the same time. So matching the demand and supply side here requires that you have some space to store it. So in this case, it's really good, because Ragn-Sells, they have a big storing place for where they can keep the aggregates, and then ship it through ships instead of trucks. Was actually a very great value for everyone. Also the shippers who hadn't used that kind of material before, but it was less complicated than they thought. That was a great experience for them as well.
Great.
Yeah, I don't know if I have so much more to say
fine.
right now, but
That's
I can come into the discussion further on, and I was zooming at my office as well, so I can connect in a better way.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah.
Thank you, Linnea. That's great.
Thank you.
And next up, I think Jenny Andersson from SGU. Would you like to say something more initial? Do you have any comments or ideas?
No, not really. It's very interesting to listen to this conversation. We are more focused on the quality of the materials and how this will affect transport. And then I think Mattias will tell more about the costs. We see a clear tendency in Sweden for the last decades that we have fewer quarries, but they are bigger, and that means more transports. And that has to do also with the kind of material produced and how much money you can get for what you're producing.
Great.
So that's when we will work more on the quality of the products, chemically and mechanically.
Makes sense. Misa, you are our last initial speaker for these ones, and that's why we speak English today. You're here, so feel honored.
I appreciate it.
Everybody else feels a pain to speak English.
My Swedish is non-existent, so I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Misa Bakajic. I'm from Aalto University here in Helsinki, and first of all, really interesting and informative presentations so far. I'll keep my sort of end somewhat brief and to the point. I don't want to overlap with what's been said, but so my perspective is as an outsider, non-Swede, but also outside of the construction industry, and started off with sort of looking at circular economy, a practical transition towards closing some of these waste material loops. And that's what I focused on sort of in master's level, and now entered the PhD with this in mind of how to coordinate waste material streams. And some of the mechanisms I've been looking at is a marketplace, a platform, sort of a middleman, and eventually made my way towards the construction sector when I've been kind of looking at aggregates in particular, mainly as a sort of benchmark for a suitable stream that should be sort of looped, or we should be able to kind of find an outlet for it, assuming it's not contaminated, yet there's still challenges, and that's sort of how I started off with. So what I mean to say is that the assumption is that we could produce some sort of savings on a societal scale and also within this individual supply chains. But it's still hard to coordinate. And my background is supply chain, much like Anna, but with a bit of added sort of information system science. So I see the world as a sort of a transfer of information and materials. That's kind of how I'm analyzing this situation. And with that in mind, my approach is currently, and research I'm doing is looking at the aggregate exchange between construction companies operating in a similar area. So I would use data such as building permits or some sort of proxy data to find potential matches to be made between someone who has excess materials and such as aggregates and a site that needs such materials at the same time in the same region. And then I would try to kind of quantify this sort of potential match. And so far what I've been finding is that even if we do assume that such matches are possible and there is a benefit, coordinating such exchanges, so practical coordination is really difficult. There's numerous reasons for it, but essentially supply chain literature doesn't really get too much into what's called like a horizontal exchange or competitors exchanging materials with the competitors. It's usually focused on optimizing your own chain and things like that. But whenever you have to inform a neighboring competitor that you do have materials and that can be exchanged, we start to get into different sort of somewhat uncharted territory. And so this is what drew me into this project. And I really think that it's fascinating, especially given what we've heard, that there is some benefit in both cost savings and CO2 savings. So progressing from there, my interest is also in looking at how the marketplace can function. And I think with Kristina, when you said that the market cannot separate presently the quarry materials from recycling nodes, and I really see that in different streams as well, but in this particular environment, it's quite an interesting thing that sort of emerges of how that would be fixed in some way. So I will sort of, without rambling on, I would like to kind of just say that this is the perspective I'm looking at, and looking at this kind of supply chain coordination between companies who are engaged with this aggregate material specifically. Yeah.
Thank you, Misa. That's a great introduction. So I think everybody who I thought were going to speak initially have done that. Thanks a lot. And now the floor is open. I was wondering if maybe Morten or Maria, Gustav, Stefan, Annika, Sofia, whomever wants to go, please.
I can start since Misa just mentioned what Kristina said, because I haven't stopped thinking about that, because I think we could discuss that a little. Kristina, maybe you could clarify both what do you mean by that the market has been not succeeded to separate the markets between the recycled aggregates and virgin material from quarries, and what do you suggest? What should we do to sort of fix that, or what is what's the solution? What's the way forward?
The solution, I think, is that you need to provide, or the market need to provide innovative, new, attractive nodes close to construction sites. But they can't be big and dirty and noisy and dusty. We need to do it in another way. How, I'm not sure. We need to think together. I mean, how they should look like in the future, but we need to have them close, and we will never be able to open new quarries close to, for example, the city center of Stockholm, or close to the city center of Gothenburg or Malmö. That will be impossible due to that. Even if we had super good rock material, they would never be accepted by the residents. It's too densely populated, and then by a fact the quarries move out, and then we need to have these recycled areas anyway in the densely populated areas, but then they need to be attractive for the people living there. And how that will be, we need to, some smart people need to like put it together how it could be attractive. And I think we need some new competence actually to work with that. I say it in the Swedish, gestaltning, and some social competence that not is included in this work right now.
But still, your answer didn't focus very much on maybe you could show the slide again that you showed us before, because
I might have written it to be a bit provocative. So
yeah. Very good, very good.
Yeah, but can I jump in, because I understand what you say, Kristina, but this is not a new question. We've been talking about this since the 90s in Swedish with these nodes, and we can't manage to get the land for it because we get driven out from it instead, just like you described. But we also have to see the other places in Sweden that aren't Linköping or Stockholm. It's a large amount of aggregated materials that is handled out in Sweden, where we can never. It's hard to get a node to work when there's a low market. And then we need to have the quarries for aggregated materials close. And of course, we have to accept to work more with dust, sound, noise, disturbance and stuff. But then we also have to have an acceptance also for the price and how I think that aggregated materials are too cheap today to manage to do that in the market.
I think the more and more I get into this, I can see that the cost today is invisible, as I said, because if you're building a house, the cost for aggregates and the transport of aggregates is transferred to the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur transfer the cost to the trucking of the material, and the cost is then clumped together with a lot of the different costs, and it's put back, it's going up to the builder that of course pay for this, but they are not aware that the costs is rising due to the lack of nodes, because they can't see it. So we need all to be better to describe the increase in cost. But that is very, very unclear for the constructor and builders today. We actually asked Trafikverket and big construction for different big construction sites, and they can't even clearly point out the cost for aggregates, handling of aggregates, and that's the only thing they do.
Yeah, but you can also wait. You can also flip the coin. In the big cities in Sweden, my company and Gustav's company and other companies are present at sites that once were long outside the communities. And the I don't know the word in English, you have to help me. Den fysiska planeringen i samhället.
Physical planning.
Urban planning hasn't, in my all years, I've been working since the 90s, taken that for an important factor. We don't have it in översiktsplaner, that you have to sort of keep these places and evolve them in the direction you are talking about. And that's because we are getting driven out of them every time we try to get a longer permit to stay there. And today we are in Gothenburg handling all these mud from Västlänken, and we are transporting it, and it's a big issue. We all know it, and we solve it, but we transport it quite a lot to handle it in quite city close today places. And I think it's a problem because we don't get to stay where we need to be, and we need both nodes and quarries. That we can agree on.
Yeah,
and we have to have a mix of it to optimize each situation. And yeah,
I totally agree with that. The urban planners hasn't they don't include this type of function in the planning, but we have to get back to ourselves. Why don't they do that? No one told them to do that. We all did maybe, but not good enough. And the bosses of them, their bosses doesn't tell them to include it, and they are also fond and used to plan for attractive things. If you look at in planning, they want to plan for the new, modern, attractive city. And that in their mind does not include dusty, noisy nodes for aggregates. So we have to present this as a attractive thing also for the planners. We can't just say that it's needed. We have to think in a different way, I think.
I think we, of course, yeah, it may have to be attractive, but I think what we have to see is that this is essential societal functions, that we need sewage water plants. They're not very attractive, but they provide great living quality, and it's fantastic functions for society. And also I think in Sweden the last couple of months we've been discussing cement supply a lot, and I think there has been an increased awareness of the importance of supply of essential material for building society, and I think that could be discussed also from an aggregates point of view, and I do think that there is a very important point in discussing this, and I think there is an increasing awareness. That's my point. I really think there is an awakening on many different levels, on a political level for sure, and also maybe in urban planning context.
I would say it's an awakening, and I can agree that it's I would say that the whole area of logistics, doesn't matter if we talk aggregates, construction logistics, just packages and so on, what's traditionally seen as city logistics, it's been forgotten in urban planning. You haven't wanted to touch freight transports, to be honest. It's been a lot of focus on person transports, but not freight transports. And therefore, freight transports have been pushed out. This is true for quarries, it's true for any kind of handling of freight. It's pushed out of the city centers. However, if we want to consume and to live in the city centers, of course, we need to accept there's going to be transports of things. And I also think another big issue regarding, for example, urban planning and aggregates and urban rock masses, whatever we should call it, the problem is also in how we plan to carry out the work in areas. For example, take these, we densify the cities, we build a lot in old port areas in order, because it's a beautiful view and you can look at the sea and so on. But instead of building from the land side out towards the sea, so we can still utilize the old port for aggregate transport and so on, we build from the sea and inwards, so we force ourselves to utilize truck transports and so on. So there's a totally lack of understanding of the transport effects, and as Kristina are into, costs of certain decisions in the urban planning system, I would say.
If I can piggyback on this a little bit. So I've been parallel to the degree which I'm doing, which is logistics focused. I'm also doing urban mobility sort of collaboration. And this is very interesting because it looks like the problem from a specific regional, I guess, perspective. Usually you're looking at one company and its suppliers. And this is why it was mentioned that some of these costs for aggregate seem low, or they're not high valued enough, and then it's sort of they get buried. And that might be true because there's so many nodes within, so many partners between a construction company and a single project. So everyone just absorbs the cost in some way, and it sort of gets hidden. But if you're looking at a region or even a neighborhood or a community, these are aggregated, and each time they have to go in and out and bring excess material, and they have to go farther and farther. You can't escape the CO2 mounting costs, no matter how much you hide it. And I think then the question is, who pays the bill for that? And I think naturally it's the city who should be now looking at that and going, the inefficient systems that are operating within your communities are creating higher CO2 generation and putting strain on the road. Now, when you take that perspective, sort of the more bigger city view, it's not, you can't hide it anymore the way that you can hide a global supply chain and pretend your tier 2 suppliers that you don't really know what they're doing, even though it's unethical. We're talking about, within the city boundaries of Stockholm. So you shouldn't be able to hide it because it's right there. The arena is, city center. So yeah, that's all from my end, just something to sort of think about perspective-wise.
That's great. Anders Gustafsson, did you have anything to add? Do you want to? Or anybody else? Annika or Sofia? I had a question. So we seem to agree upon that there is like a lack of nodes, and there are many reasons why we don't have the nodes today. And of course, urbanization and the densifying of the city, the word densification, nice. Is probably a part of this. It's hard to have those kind of nodes there. On the other hand, I think that when we speak about the research products about how a modern quarry, a modern terminal node look like, they are much better than before, Kristina. So they are cleaner, less dusty, less noisy. And for me, it's like it's a conundrum. It's like I don't get it. Why don't we have more nodes? Because if we have only a few ones, we get more transport and more noise spread out over the city. And I spoke to a large hauling company today, and they were denied to drive the big trucks on collecting. I think it was like a large amount of soil, the big with 4. And they promised they could repave the road, but they were denied to do it. And they increased the number of trucks by 1,000 more trucks over this area. That's a lot of gasoline, diesel, and a lot of possible traffic accidents and hazards for kids, etc., going into central urban area and not having those ones. Kristina, who do we target to get this message across, to get across and to explain this, that there is a cost that we are paying today but nobody seems to care about?
I think how do you say in Swedish? Kommundirektörerna. But then we have to present costs.
Yeah.
How much does that municipality pay for the aggregates today, and what is the savings? We have not been able to show those numbers yet.
And I'm not sure we should point out of course there is a point in what was Kristina saying, but I think the political culture, well, at least it's not my fault, you can always say, of course it's in the system, it's in the culture, and maybe the environmental permit process in Sweden is since it's very costly and it's very time consuming to get also a short permit. Kristina was talking a lot about this not more temporary short-term terminals rather than 40-year permits for a quarry. But I think there is an important point in by presenting what we're discussing today, the cost, the societal cost, and who. I think that point that you pointed out, Kristina, that the cost is high, but it's hidden. Where and also when we discuss this cement supply, also Trafikverket at a rather late stage, they no, but we don't order any cement. We don't we will not get that affected. Of course, maybe a bit, but not very much. Well, it's not obvious that I order a lot of cement, since it's many links and many actors.
Yeah, and this is it's I can totally agree, Martin, regarding your descriptions, and that it's a problem. The lack of understanding of supply chains in general in urban planning, and as I say, freight transports. There, we have in another project called Disturbance-free cities, eller störningsfri stad, seen there is a planning gap in urban planning. So there is a focus on either how beautiful and perfect things gonna be once it's finished, and then we have, this is how it works today. But everyone who lives in the city know that an urban area is under constant change. So we're never going to reach this, like how beautiful it's going to be once it's finished. It's always going to be a new project and a new project and a new project. And that's a lack of understanding that these projects create transport flows. They're going to need materials. They're going to get rid of things. Otherwise, we can't build new things. And there's very little presently understanding of how to deal with this question in urban planning. But I think, as Kristina or someone else said, there is an awakening going on, and we can see it in, how should we put it, Kristina, Linea, in the demand of research within these areas, which is like really growing now. But unfortunately, I think Carl have managed very well, because he have somehow gathered the 3, or maybe we are 1 or 2 more in Sweden doing this, but it's not a lot of researchers either that's been interested in the supply chains of aggregates and earth and rock masses and so on.
No, you are few, but really good. I called everyone there is to call. Stefan, what's your perspective as a big provider? I mean, order guy. We're going to procure.
Yeah. I can only agree with most things that's been said. I think this business has been taken for granted. I mean, these how to handle the rock aggregates that gets created in different projects have been taken for granted. That we people are here, we solve the situations usually. So the problems doesn't get seen by the ones who needs to see the problem. And we're sitting here now, so I'm sitting solving the problems for our projects that are occurring. And maybe it doesn't work this time. So that's one of the reasons I think is up on the table right now. The costs are becoming very visible for us in our projects right now. And the people paying for that are also becoming aware of this. That's why some stuff is happening right now, I think. Yeah, so I think that's, and I think for the big, large projects, we are lacking, if the ones driving the projects are lacking tools to actually create space for handling these materials. The urban planning laws doesn't allow us to take space for this, which is strange. So we are dependent on cooperation with the surrounding, municipalities, landowners, and to be able to create something that we are 100% in charge of ourselves as we are dependent on a market which has been working, I think, fine for the rock aggregates, but it's been a rocky ride lately. But so it's a lot of dependencies, and it's so many, and it's on individual basis, and too late in the stage of a project, these things become an issue, and we need to be better at that. The ones who are planning these projects, but we also need to be driven on. We need to be told. We need to be told to do this. And in some, I've seen you spoke about Göteborg earlier, and Västlänken, and I think at least early on in that stage, the government told them this stuff about handling all the materials need to be fixed in an efficient way. And I think that has at least driven them to start early to plan. I don't know how, if it's not working great or not now, but they have very difficult material to handle. But no one told us that for the subways in the metro in Stockholm. It wasn't even up on the government table back then. So I think that's also important. And the costs, yeah. We cannot always see the specific costs. It depends on how we procure and how we ask the contractors to give us a price. So that's something to be thinking about maybe. But we don't have the whole chain either of the costs. So I think there's a lot to be done there maybe. The visibility and the traceability. But generally, I was thinking about you when you're talking earlier on about costs. Isn't it basically too cheap to transport material? Isn't that the problem? If we make it more expensive, 100% fossil fuels, how do we weigh in transportation costs when we procure someone who are accepting our material? How much do we weigh that in? We do that when we procure, but how much? It's always hard to decide. I think if we higher the costs, at least when you evaluate, that could be one important driver. But
aren't you just distorting the market once more then, Stefan, if you are increasing the cost for transport even more? Because the real issue is not the transport cost. The real issue is that we don't have the possibility to have terminals or nodes or places, spaces, either temporary or permanently, in a reasonable way. We don't factor in the costs to society, environmentally or or economically, when it comes to the placement of production facilities. And by increasing the price, you might even distort it even worse and sweeping it under the rug, because it won't create more terminals, will it? At a higher price, it will just punish someone's, but not others. And yeah, I don't know. I think
you might be right, especially if you only do this once in a while. Yeah. But if everyone does it all the time, it could be a driver. Yeah. Maybe if that's something that is that you could expect in every procurement, and that could be maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
Linea.
Yeah, I think there is also the problem of the way we look upon aggregates. For example, in Trelleborg's hamn, they export a lot of aggregates to Denmark, for example, because they have other ways of like the limit values and so on. I know there is a trade-off there, and of course we shouldn't use material like uncontrolled, but it's still, I think, a limitation in the way we look at the aggregates, and that we always see them as recyclables, whereas it's actually a material that has, that can be used if we do it the right way. So
I agree.
I agree, and I also regarding what you said, Stefan, I actually think there is going to change is going to happen also because we have this increasing demand of traceability of not only materials but also the transport impact of construction projects. So I know, for example, that the Trafikverket, Swedish Transport Administration, they are presently demanding real data and not anticipated data or estimated data regarding the emissions of trucks and machinery in construction projects. And that's such a brilliant way of actually getting hold of the transport costs, because suddenly we have to track the transports and we have to track the machinery, and then we get the utilization rate. And thereby we can also understand the movements and so on, and how much we have spent on moving around things. And I think we also, what should be kept here, or like kept in memory here, is that I think we move a lot of things that we don't have to move because of lack of planning, because of lack of planning horizon. Today, most of these planning of those transports, they are happening on a daily basis. Then you don't get this coordination advantages. Then you can't consolidate in a good way. So once you start having the data, once you are able to plan maybe on a, I would not dream too high, but maybe 3-day horizon. So that would be lovely. What you say, Linea, we've done our PhDs in planning, but 3 days isn't. That's what you have in the car industry. So that would be possible here, I guess. I think it would be even.
But Anna, this data that you are describing, who has this data, or who will have it eventually?
Yeah, the Swedish Traffic Administration are demanding to have data.
Yeah.
So then they are forcing the contractors to collect this data, who's gathering it from their subcontractors, who's actually taking it. In most cases, I had a meeting this morning with Cubicom, who's one of those data gathering companies, who's taking it directly from the machinery, actually.
But that's very interesting, because I think that there is an opportunity right now we have this the governmental assignment on handling excavated masses for the Environmental Protection Agency. They will of course make some kind of economist analysis on a national basis, and I'm quite sure that they don't have the same perspective as we're describing here. And you can also always discuss where is the baseline and what should we compare to and whatever. It's a very important opportunity, I think, to provide this data to the Environmental Protection Agency, and that has to be done now. What should we do?
Gustav, answer.
Answer or a follow-up question that I think we need to take with us. Yeah, it's really good that the Trafikverket wants this data from the contractors, but how do we get them in the planning stage to use data to make the planning for it? Because if you just put it on the contractors that, yeah, you need to get better, but if you don't give the possibilities to make the easy fix to have it in the planning stage, how do we get that to happen? That's the problem, I think. We always push everything on the contractors. You need to do LCA for all buildings. But how do you do an LCC in the city planning to see, oh, we need this lot. We need to save this to the last buildings who have this node. Where do you have that LCC cost, the LCC for that decision in the planning stage? I think that's where we have the problem. We push everything on the contractors. And there we have the difficult decision that's day to day or week to week, but we don't have the 10-year planning in the beginning.
I think you have a very important point here, Gustav. We have to sort of point. It's not very easy, but we have to point out what could be solved by the right demands in procurement, and what is legal obstacles. And I want to emphasize on what Linea said before, that it's easy to think that this is a physical problem. Where should we put this this load? Where can we get material? But it's also a question of how do we judge the material? It is a legal obstacle issue, and we have to sort of sort in this. What is an legal obstacle issue and what is a procurement issue? And I think that got very clear when we answered on this upphandlingsmyndigheten, procurement department, legal department, that they had the image that this whole problem could be solved just by formulating the right demands in public procurements. But that's not the issue as I see it.
Certainly not. Misa.
Yeah, just quickly about what was previously mentioned with Gustav and before him. So what I've found is there is a sort of centralized need to gather the data, whether it's a region or the entire country, but that need is on a higher level. And there's a problem there that how you share that data. You could do a proxy, so look at the CO2 emissions, what Anna mentioned, and then sort of try to get the costs, and that's fine. But then the actual implementation of this, some of these efforts, they're really not a centralized implementation. It's more like two companies collaborating or a cluster, and that's where it starts to fall apart. At least in Finland, we're all about data at the moment. The last 5 years has been opening of every data source. Different cities have such high quality means to get data from different sources and everything, but we're reaching this point where we don't know what to do with the data. And there's not enough people who can actually tie this stuff together. Sure, you have sources, and it's great for researchers like me, but the average company, it's a bit difficult to sort of to establish some sort of data source and then derive value and coordinate with this data. And that, at least the way I'm conceptualizing it, it's usually done company to company or a cluster of companies. If anything practical is going to come out of it, laws do get made in top down, and that's fair enough. But the implementation of something is sort of point to point. And I have to say also with the supply chain at the moment, it seems that some of these companies, they're figuring out that it's not, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, that some of them feel that handling aggregates in one way or another is a sort of competitive advantage, when in reality, isn't everyone in a similar boat in terms of costs and procuring this stuff? Or can you suddenly go to Estonia and procure aggregates? Is that what people do? It's my understanding it's a localized market, meaning it touches everyone in the same way, meaning it's not really a competitive advantage to do one thing or another. Everyone's hit the same way.
Good, Misa. Sophia, please.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I just want to begin to thank all of you for all the interesting presentations and discussions and so. And well, it's obvious there is not one solution. Just like you said, Morten, we need to sort all of it. Like better data of costs, environmental aspects, and so. I'm sure that will help us. But then I especially would like to go back to an idea that you, Kristina, presented that was really a new thought for me. And this is like planning for the nodes, the temporary nodes in the city centers in a new, different way. I think that was really interesting as one thing to do. Before, when I worked at Trafikverket, I'd had the opportunity to work a lot with like architects competencies within gestalting, and and also when we work with mass handling, and that was really, really great to work together. So I think that's a great idea, even when we plan for these nodes, because today, like urban planning, we always have to choose, like, okay, can we do it in a social, nice way? And in this way, if we look at these nodes, like with more competencies, maybe we don't have to choose in the modern city. Maybe we can plan them in a way so they can give other kind of values on the outside, for example. So I really like that idea as one part of the solution, of course, but to get nodes in the more central parts.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. I think it is, from my point of view, it's hard to know why we haven't done it before, but that's life. We always see the obvious benefits, thinking, and we can't maybe foresee the future and say this is exactly why it happened. The question to me is more like operational. What can we do now to try to strengthen the argument for establishing those attractive new quarries or nodes in more central places in Stockholm? Kristina, please.
I don't have the answer to that question, sorry. But I had a question to Morten, but he maybe is not there yet, right now.
Oh, he's here.
Because the question is about the cost, because the Morten often says that they don't get permits. So the question is how much it has to be paid for a permit, and then I think about the in Swedish then Anmälan, for a temperate hub, so to say, a node. I think we first of all need to do Anmälan.
Yep.
The easier way. So how much is the cost for that? And I would also like to have the cost for establishing such a smaller area. We have done some calculations, but it would be good to think together, and also to include cost for doing it in an attractive way. I think we have to have a better view of the costs. But then some solutions is that we have been talking about urban planners. And I think that we need to, of course, do things short terms to solve like Stefan's problems right now. But we also have to thinking in the long run. And that is maybe a question to the universities. I mean, what courses urban planners take, we have to broaden the understanding for the questions. And then we also have to train the new generation, because this is material flow that nobody knows about. If we that work with aggregates, if we tell our friends, they're like, what is that? They don't have a clue. So that is more like the long-term, I don't know, solution, but one key, but I don't have the short term.
Yeah. I just want to say something.
Yeah.
Can I say first?
Yes.
I agree that it should be an Anmälan, Kristina, but that's not the reality today in Stockholm. In Stockholm, the way they treat legislation and how it's tillämpat, what is that in English? Praxis. We have to have permits for these smaller nodes too. And to tell the costs here, I won't do that, but it can vary a lot, because you don't just have to have an environmental permit. You have to have a bygglov. You have to have marklov. You have to have a lot of investigations during noise reduction, transporting, you have to address. And in Stockholm, some of the anmälningsärenden in history, when we could make anmälningsärenden, for example, Farsta, as you talked about, and Solna, which we were having at Skanska was there for quite some years in Farsta, actually, from the 70s or 60s. So we've been there for quite a while. but it's like a permit application to make an anmälan sometimes too. So it can be a lot of costs combined with getting the place. But then you also come in these överprövningar because people aren't accepting us anyway. So I don't know. Of course, we have to try to make our notes more attractive and be accepted. But it's hard because I might sound a bit mentalt försurad now, but my experience during the years I've been working is that people are more and more not tolerating our business, even if we are at very low levels with dust, noise, and everything. And that's quite an issue to communicate in society, that people understand why aggregated materials are a need for and how they impact. So that is a really big question for us to deal with forward, I think.
Yeah. I think maybe, sorry, Anna, I think it would be very interesting to like invite children from förskola and school.
We've done it. We've done it for several years in Hallsberg, for example. So we don't do it anymore because there are safety issues and stuff. But I have actually been on trains and started talking to some persons, and they told me, where do you work? Oh, I've been there when I went to school, and they do remember it. So that's wise, but it's hard because that is one way of doing it, but it can't solve everything. But that's wise to go into the schools and tell them. And there's actually a book for children that's called Asphalt. A small kids book. If you don't know of it, Google it. It's quite nice. Yeah. So that is the way.
But Maria, is it so that none get any permits by Anmälan today? Because we just did an investigation on the number of hubs by Anmälan.
And we managed to get one in the south area of Stockholm for a few, the closest years. But most of them, if I do like this, 5 fingers, we get no on 4 of them, and they demand permits for it because they classify Stefans rock as from Futten as avfall.
Dangerous.
Because I think one of the I also heard the same as you heard, Maria, and it's a problem regarding how we view this, and that's also what Linea says, that we should they be viewed as materials or as waste? But that's one discussion. But I also think one problem is also that we do is regarding how the environmental legislation is interpreted.
Yeah,
and it's very locally interpreted.
Yep.
So it's a very heavy focus on the local environment, and it's very little focus put on the climate problem.
Yeah.
So I think by highlighting the transport impact, so that we show that by not allowing these local nodes, we're going to have this and this much more CO2 emissions, then there will be a totally another discussion as well. It will also be the discussion on noise and so on, but it will lift the discussion to also be about the climate impact of these kind of decisions. And I think that's, at least what I have seen, that's a awareness raiser among municipality planners, but also among politicians, because if you can say that, say that by not allowing us to be here, you're going to increase CO2 emissions by this and this much. So I think we need to include those kind of things in the calculations as well, and not only cost, because cost is for the industry. It's for those one paying, but CO2 emissions are for the general public.
Should you be able to put that in the zero alternative in the permits and the
I think I would do it. I would definitely put it in the permit applications.
CO2, NOx, everything you should be able to.
By not going here, our alternative is to go here. Then we will have this much more CO2 emissions. And you will have this amount much more heavy transports. And I would always do, what we also can see this in disturbance-free cities is the routing. So how will you route the heavy transports in the cities? And show that these heavy transports are going to pass this and this school on its way, because we cannot take it to the closest place. We have to go this far away instead.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
I've been working with regulatory personnel for almost 30 years, and I think they really need to have tools. And we have had municipalities also in southern Sweden that just refuse to have one quarry. And it's been we discussed this in plans for the county that that you need to think about transports, and then we get their reaction back from court, and they just calculated the bird way, how a bird would fly from one quarry, whereas in reality it could be hundreds of kilometers. So I think they really need tools, and my experience from all these years is that the more information and the more tools they have, they will make faster and better decisions. And I think it's very worrying what you said before, that if there's just a few handful of researchers who actually can give us those tools, I will use them immediately. Please send them to us.
Well,
we need them. And the regulatory personnel need them too.
You have a very important role in that, Jenny, in SGU. I think your reports are key to this, and it's not advanced modeling that is required. I think it's more easy kind of communication. I think Kristina mentioned invite children to the quarries, and of course we have done campaigns like this in the history, and the delivery time for a result on that action is maybe quite long. But I think just informing politicians, for example, and I think there is an opportunity right now, as we've been talking about before, that the debate that has come as an effect of the cement situation, I think it points out very clear that the material supply for construction, society construction is very important.
Mattias Göransson, welcome. You joined us brief for some time ago, but do you have anything you would like to say to us about this, or any
hello. So far I missed most of what you have said, but I think it's very interesting what I heard the last 5 minutes. We discussed this earlier, Carl, and is it still of interest? I show you some slides.
Yeah, we were kind of in time crunch. We have 3 minutes to go, but could you share them? I think that would be great.
Okay, it's only four.
Yeah, please show them.
So I just go through the basic facts. And let's see here, share screen. So do you see PowerPoint, please?
Yes, we see it.
Anything?
Yes, great.
Yes. So for you not Swedish speakers, I can say it's my very short slides. A few slides should tell you something about the statistics according to the number of quarries of Sweden. And I agree what Morten just told us, that it doesn't have to be very complicated data, and to inform that the leaders of the country of these questions. So if you look at our periodica that we regularly publish in December, I think the last one, the one we're going to publish this December will come in 2 weeks or something like that, before Christmas, I hope. You can find here also in the red square how the number of quarries have decreased through the 30 last years. So now we have a total of 1188 quarries, but we have had numbers of something like 5,000. And if you go back to the 70s or the early 80s, there were at least 8,000 quarries in Sweden. And when all the main difference, the main reason for this is that the gravel pits have been not been continued. So, and instead we have seen that hard rock quarries have been increasing slowly. And we also see that the amount from each quarry increases very much. And this is also corresponding to that we have fewer and fewer quarries, so they have to produce more and more aggregates. If you look at the gravel pits, only the gravel pits, it seems like we are going into a sort of lower value here. Maybe we cannot decrease any further. It looks like that when you go into simple statistics. So maybe we have reached the bottom number of gravel pits for the moment. And when we look into the international perspective, when you look at, for example, this is open data on the UEPG website, you can find that when it comes to the number of quarries per million inhabitants, Sweden has a very high number, but still we have all our Nordic neighboring countries, they have even higher numbers, more quarries per capita. And if you look at the we compare how many quarries each country have compared to the area size of the countries, you find Sweden here at a quite low value. Still here we have also countries like Iceland, we also have Norway. They have even lower value than Sweden, but Finland we find here instead. So what I like to, this was the last picture, I think, yes. So if I should sum up this, is that I think it's very important not to lower the number of quarries in Sweden more, because that will immediately lead to greater, bigger transport, more transports in the whole of country. So that will be a big problem if we take away a lot of these smaller countries, smaller quarries. So that was that, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Mattias. That's great. I think this is the query per size of country is really interesting. I think that's a kind of an indication that we are probably on place number like 20 on the scale of Misa, would you like to say something concluding from your point of view?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a very, especially this last figures was very eye-opening, and it's very interesting that in a regular market situation you would expect the reduction of sort of supply in some way to generate a higher price. I mean, the less people selling something, you know, it would increase. But we have seen now that actually the prices sort of got decreased, partly because we've, you know, there's been changes, but definitely the market is not functioning as it should, and that's sort of having ripple effects. So I think, yeah, there's something there in terms of research to look into this more. Like I said, I'm approaching it first. There's actually a conference presentation next month about a more qualitative approach of how companies could even exchange or make a match, as I mentioned earlier. But then I'm also interested in a more aggregate level, and some of the stuff that's closer to what was discussed, and this higher like a level that includes looking at nodes and that impact on the market and what that would do. So yeah, I think definitely if someone is interested in this and pursuing this, we can kind of talk about this and schedule something in the future. I think there's a lot of stuff here, and made me really laugh a little bit when Mario mentioned how he included school kids, and you know, just recently I've been teaching my kid sort of where electricity comes from, what happens when you flush, you know, because these things are obviously what an average person does not care about, but I'm at that stage where I have to tell my kids, you know, why you can't flush 20 times in a row. There's repercussions. So, you know, and I feel that's where we are as a society, is that we just do not know aggregates, and yet they're everywhere, and that's the reality. So maybe that's another initiative that we can talk about in the future, as was mentioned. This is the payoff is quite long for that. But yeah, that's what I have on my end, and that's where my interests lie. So if there's some alignment, yeah, welcome to talk.
Certainly will. Kristina, would you like to conclude something from your point of view?
I think we have a lot to win if we collaborate. As Sophia said, collaborate on how to create this attractive nodes, and collaborate to approach politicians and also the directors in different organizations to visualize this flow and this costs of society in both the economic and environment point of view.
Morten, you want to say something?
Can I emphasize on what Misa just said, that we have an important public education mission and I of course I agree that the quarries and the terminals should be attractive if possible, but I think what we should focus on is to stress the need for it. It's essential for building society, and we just have to make people understand that it's essential for society. We're on a public education mission. Thank you. Very interesting discussions today.
Maria, do you want to conclude?
Well, actually, I think we've said lots of stuff that's relevant and important. So I pause there.
Jenny or Mattias from SGU, do you would like to say some final words?
Maybe we can learn from the nuclear waste management industry that in the municipalities where these sites are planned, the public is the only time that I was a mapping person from a governmental agency. They were more reluctant to meet me than to actually let the nuclear waste management in. They were very positive, and they learned, because when they started in the 90s, people were extremely afraid and nobody wanted this in their backyard. And I was also mapping in those days, and it was terrible. But after all they learned, they went home and they did a lot of communication locally. And now the communities, some of them really wants them around. And this is an altitude of problem much more than just non-radioactive rocks.
I hope so.
Do you have a quarry in your neighborhood? You should get one.
Free
The
stones.
neighborhood soon close to you.
That's great. I think I like it. I love it, Jenny. Sorry, here, Annika or Sophia, would you like to say something? Some final words?
I think most of it is said. Collaboration, and we need to work with different kinds of questions. We need queries, but we also need to make the central part more in a different way, maybe. So, yeah.
I think so too. I think Morten is right. We need to do this education and try to make it visual. I think Richard Dawkins said something about the science is cool. If you don't get it, fuck off. And this is kind of what we need to do here. We have to be very clear that this is not like optional stones. We need them and we have to pay for them, and we are paying for them today, but we don't pay the price. We don't see the price, as Kristina says. So I think it's great, engaging topic today. We will certainly revisit this. I don't know the next step in this process, but we certainly will see that in our upcoming seminars, and feel free to reach out to me or anyone in this network if you feel so. I especially love to thank, of course, Kristina and Linea and Jenny and Mattias and also Misa, of course, for doing some preparation as well in advance for this meeting, and Anna, of course, that left a few minutes ago. So it was great speaking to you, and I would love to meet you soon again. But I think it's Christmas, so I wish you also a Merry Christmas, and we meet maybe to speak about sulfuric rocks in end of January, or about concrete in mid-January. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Carl.